The Duke of Sandford crossed the whole length of the Weldon assembly room and asked Susan Wright to dance, and the room turned to watch him do it. Her sister Rebecca stood against the wall with both their cloaks folded over her arm, and she did not mind, and did not move until the torn cuff of her left glove slipped back off her wrist, and the Duke stopped mid-turn to look at it. It lasted the space of one breath. He had Susan's hand already lifted in his, and the fiddles had already begun, and 40 people were already deciding what it meant that a duke had walked past 3 heiresses to reach a glover's counter girl in white muslin. Nobody saw him look. Nobody except Rebecca, who felt it the way one feels a draught from an opened door, and who put her right hand over her left wrist without deciding to. The mark was small. It sat an inch above the bone on the inside of her left wrist, dark brown and roughly oval. No bigger than a thumbprint, and she had worn something over it since she was 11 years old. Ribbon, usually. A black ribbon tied twice and knotted underneath, which she had been told at 11 made her tidy, and had understood by 12 made her hidden. Tonight the ribbon was in her pocket, because gloves were meant to be enough, and her gloves were 4 years old, and the left cuff had given way at the seam that afternoon while she was cutting. She pulled the cuff down. The kid was soft and dead, and did not want to stay. Anthony Merrick, 5th Duke of Sandford, led Susan Wright out into the middle of the floor and did everything correctly for the length of 2 dances. He was a man who did most things correctly. What he did not do was stop thinking, for the whole of 8 minutes of country dance, about a lamp on a workbench and a sleeve pushed back to the elbow, and a small dark mark an inch above the bone, seen once, 14 months ago, in a room he could not afterwards find again. Rebecca watched her sister dance and was glad. That was the plain truth of it, and it surprised nobody who knew her. Susan was 21 and looked well in white and could talk to a stranger for a quarter of an hour without once running dry, which was a skill Rebecca regarded with the same distant admiration she gave to men who could juggle. Susan stood at the counter of Wilkins's glove warehouse in the High Street 6 days a week and made customers feel that buying gloves was a pleasure rather than a transaction. Rebecca sat in the back workroom and made the gloves. That division had been Isaac Wilkins's idea, and like most of his ideas, it had been presented as a kindness. The Weldon glove warehouse sold to 3 counties. It had a green painted front and a brass bell over the door and a long counter of polished elm, and above the counter, in gilt letters a foot high, the words Wilkins and Co, Glovers. Behind the counter was a passage, and off the passage was the cutting room, where 4 women and 1 girl worked at benches under north windows, because north light does not lie about the colour of leather. Rebecca had sat at the 3rd bench for 12 years. She was the best cutter in Suffolk. Mrs. Lacey, who had sat at the 1st bench for 30, said so freely and did not consider it a compliment so much as a fact of local geography, like the river. Cutting gloves is not sewing gloves. Anyone patient can sew. Cutting is where the trade lives, because a skin is not a sheet of cloth, and every skin has a direction in it, a way it will give and a way it will not, and a cutter who reads that wrong makes a glove that splits at the thumb in a month. Rebecca could take a whole hide of kid across the table, run her palm over it twice, and know before she lifted the knife where the stretch ran. She could look at a hand across the counter and be within 1/8 of an inch. She had a book of 1,100 hands in it, ruled and dated, every entry in her own upright writing, the measurements of every customer who had been fitted in that shop since she was 14, and inside the wrist seam of every pair she had ever cut, where nobody would find it unless they turned the glove inside out and knew to look. She set 4 small stitches in a line. It was her mark. Her father had had 3 stitches at the thumb gusset, and his father before him. And it had never been a secret so much as a private habit, the way a man might sign the back of a drawer he had made. Her father was 11 years dead. Wilkins had bought the business from her mother the same autumn, and her mother had followed her father inside 2 years, and by the time Rebecca was 17, the only thing left in the world that said Wright on it was 4 stitches nobody ever saw. The assembly ended at 11:30. Walking home along the high street with Susan's arm through hers and the cold coming up off the cobbles, Rebecca listened to her sister be happy. "He asked what I liked," Susan said. "Not what my father did. Not who I came with. What I liked." "And what do you like?" I said gloves. Susan laughed at herself, the small, peeling laugh that sold 4 pairs a week to men who did not need gloves. "Becca, I said gloves. To a duke. You'd know. I said I liked the cutting best." Susan's arm tightened, and something in the laugh went out of true. "He asked me a great many questions about the cutting." Rebecca said nothing. The cobbles went by. "I answered them," Susan said. "I know you did. Mr. Wilkins says it's better for trade if they think it's me. I know he does." They walked the rest of the way in the particular silence of 2 people who love each other and have found the edge of a subject. What Susan did not know, and what Rebecca had told nobody in 14 months, was that the Duke of Sandford had already been inside the cutting room once. It had been the January before last, near 9 at night, black outside and raining. Rebecca had stayed late finishing a christening order, alone in the room with 2 lamps and the stove, and there had been a knock at the yard door, which was not the door customers used because customers did not come at 9 at night. The man in the yard had been soaked to the shoulders and had his right hand held against his chest, wrapped in a handkerchief, holding it the careful way people hold a hand that hurts. He did not give a name. He said he had been told there was a glover in Weldon who could cut, and that he needed a glove he could get onto a burned hand without taking the skin with it, and that he needed it by morning. She had brought him in and sat him down and made him unwrap it. The burn ran across the back of the hand from the base of the thumb to the little finger, healing badly, the new skin shining and tight. 6 weeks old, she guessed, and someone had told him to keep it covered, and someone else had told him gloves were out of the question, and both of them had been half right. "Who did this?" she had asked. "A stable roof came down. There was a lamp in it. And the horse?" He had looked at her then, properly, for the first time. "The horse is well," he had said, and something in his face had eased about 1/4 of an inch, which she had understood to be a great deal for him. She had cut him a glove that night. Not a fashionable glove. She had put the seam where no seam belonged, running it up the outside edge from the wrist to the little finger, so that the glove opened like a book and closed over the hand rather than being dragged onto it, and she had set 2 hooked fastenings at the wrist to hold it shut, and she had cut the whole thing from the softest lambskin in the drawer, so thin you could read print through it. It had taken her 4 hours. Her sleeve had been pushed back to the elbow the entire time, because you cannot cut in a sleeve. He had watched her hands the way men watch a thing being done well. He had not watched her face. She remembered that clearly and without resentment, because she had not watched his either. She had watched the leather. At 2 in the morning she had turned the glove and set 4 stitches inside the wrist seam, and he had asked what that was, and she had said it was nothing, and he had paid her 18 shillings and gone out into the rain. She had never told Wilkins. She had never entered it in the book. It was, in 12 years, the only pair of gloves she had ever made that were entirely and only hers. 3 days after the assembly, a carriage stopped outside the green front of Wilkins and Co, and a lean grey man in a black coat came in and asked for the proprietor. Mr. Naylor was steward at Sandford Hall, and had been for 19 years, and he came with a folded paper and no expression at all. The Hall's glove contract was to be put out fresh at Michaelmas. Household gloves for 46 servants, riding gloves, mourning gloves for the anniversary of the late Duke, dress gloves for the family and guests, 412 pairs a year. It was the largest single order in the county, and had gone to a Norwich house for 2 decades. His Grace wishes to see the work of local makers, Naylor said. He wishes particularly to know who cuts here. Isaac Wilkins came out from behind the counter with both hands already spread. He was 60, grey, side-parted, with a face built for reassurance and a habit of wearing very fine, pale kid gloves indoors, which Rebecca had noticed years ago were not from his own house, and had never once said so aloud. He had bought her father's business, her father's benches, her father's patterns, and her father's customers, and he had kept every one of them by being a man who was pleasant to owe money to. "Who cuts here?" Wilkins repeated warmly. "Why, the house cuts, Mr. Naylor. 30 years of my own hand on the knife, and my own eye on the skin. It's all one method here, all one mark." Behind him, standing in the passage with a bundle of pattern papers against her chest, Rebecca looked at the back of his head. "His Grace has a glove," Naylor said. "Made in this town 14 months ago. He has been asking after the maker for some considerable time. He tells me he has written to this establishment twice." "He has," said Wilkins, delighted, "and I have answered him twice, and I will answer him a 3rd time with pleasure. It is our work. The wrist seam is our own particular finish. I taught it myself." The pattern papers made a small sound against Rebecca's apron. Naylor's eyes came past Wilkins's shoulder and rested on her for perhaps 2 seconds. Then he unfolded his paper and said that the tenders would be read at the hall on the 29th, that the makers should attend in person with their books, and that his Grace would be present. When the bell over the door had stopped moving, Wilkins turned around. "Rebecca," he said, "you'll want to look at the mourning patterns." "Yes, Mr. Wilkins." "Susan will come to the hall with me. She has the face for it." "Yes, Mr. Wilkins." He went back to the counter, and she went back to the bench, and Mrs. Lacey did not look up from the seam she was closing, and said quietly to the leather, "Twice he's written." "I know." 12 years, Becca." "I know," Rebecca said, and picked up the knife. The Duke came himself on the Tuesday. He came without warning, and without a Naylor, on foot, in a bottle-green tailcoat with rain on the shoulders of it, and he walked past the counter and past Susan's greeting, and straight down the passage into the cutting-room as though he had been there before, which he had once in the dark. 5 women stood up. Ellen Poole, who was 15 and had been indentured in the spring, dropped a bodkin. "Sit down," he said. "Please." They sat down. He stood in the middle of the room and looked at the north windows and the benches and the racks of skins and the stove, and Rebecca watched him place it, watched the room resolve for him out of a memory of 2 lamps and a wet coat, and she saw exactly the moment his shoulders changed. Then he came to the 3rd bench and put something on it. It was the glove. 14 months of wear had darkened the palm and worn the hooks bright, and it had been kept oiled and kept clean and kept, which told her more about him than any conversation had. He laid it down, turned inside out, wrist seam up, so that the 4 small stitches sat in plain view under the north light, the only light in Suffolk that does not lie. "I have carried this since January of last year," he said. "I have been told in writing, twice, that the mark on it belongs to this house. Nobody in the room breathed. I am not going to ask anyone here to contradict their employer, the Duke said. I have no wish to cost anyone a place. I would like instead to ask a technical question, which anyone may answer or not. He turned the glove a little with one finger. Why is the seam on the outside edge? Mrs. Lacey looked at Rebecca. Ellen looked at Rebecca. The two women at the far bench looked very hard at their work. Rebecca put down her knife. Because you could not have got a normal glove on, she said. The burn ran across the back of the hand, and the new skin was tight, and it would have torn if it had been dragged. So the glove had to open flat and close over the hand instead. That is why the seam is where it is, and why there are hooks and not buttons. Because you could not have done buttons one-handed. The skin is lamb skin, because Kid would have gripped the scar. The room was entirely silent. How is the hand? She asked. The Duke of Sandford looked at her for a long moment. Better, he said. It stopped splitting within a month of wearing that. Then the seam was right. Yes, he said. It was right. He did not ask to see her wrist. She noticed that and was grateful for it, and did not know then that he had already seen it twice, once by lamplight over a cutting table and once across an assembly room floor, and that he had recognized her before he came through the door. What he said instead was, "Would you fit me?" Now in front of everyone, so that nobody afterwards can say it was arranged. She measured him standing up at the bench with the whole room watching. Knuckles, span, thumb length, the width of the palm below the little finger. She wrote it in the book in her own upright hand, entry 1104, and then she read it back to him, and then she did the thing she had done to 1100 people before him without ever thinking about it. Your right hand is a 16th wider than your left across the knuckles, she said. It always was. That's not the burn. That's from a rein held one way for 20 years. Whoever made your gloves before cut you two of the same, and you have been splitting the right thumb every winter. Behind her, Mrs. Lacey made a sound that was almost a laugh and entirely a cheer. The Duke of Sandford looked at his own hands as though he had been introduced to them. Every winter, he said, since I was 19. Isaac Wilkins arrived in the doorway at that moment, and the Duke turned round and thanked him, very pleasantly, for the loan of his cutting room, and said he looked forward to the 29th. The weeks between were the best working weeks of Rebecca's life, and she knew it while they were happening, which is rare. The morning order came in from the hall as a trial. 60 pairs of black gloves for the anniversary of the late Duke, to be delivered in 11 days. Wilkins took the order at the counter with Susan beside him, and brought it into the back and put it on the third bench without a word. Because he was not a fool, and knew precisely who was going to cut it. Rebecca cut 60 pairs in 9 days. She had Ellen Poole at her elbow the whole time, and taught her, out loud in front of the others, the way her father had taught her. Run the palm twice. Find the stretch. Never cut across it. A glove is a hand made of an animal that had a direction. Ellen learned it. Mrs. Lacey closed the seams and said nothing, and looked 20 years younger. The Duke came twice more. The first time he brought Naylor and a list of 46 servants' hands to be taken, and stayed 3 hours while the household filed through the cutting room, and Rebecca measured 46 people and remembered 30 of their names by the end of it. The second time he came alone, in the evening, and sat on the corner of the second bench with his hat on his knee while she finished a pair, and they talked for an hour and a half about nothing that either of them could afterwards summarize. He told her about the stable roof. She told him about her father's 3 stitches at the thumb gusset. He asked why she had put 4 instead of 3, and she said because 3 were her father's, and she had not thought she was entitled to them yet. And he was quiet for a while after that. He did not say anything that could not have been said in a full room. Neither did she. It was, both of them understood without discussing it, not the moment. There was a contract to be read on the 29th, and a great deal about her situation that neither of them had yet said out loud. Because there was the indenture. Rebecca Wright was bound. She had signed her articles at 14, the spring after her father died, 7 years to Isaac Wilkins in return for her keep and her training, and the 7 years had become 9 by a clause she had not understood at 14, and the 9 had become 15 in a document she had been shown once at 19, and had signed in the back office with Wilkins's hand flat on the top half of the page. She had 3 years and 4 months left. Until then, she could not take work in her own name, could not sign a contract, could not put a mark on a glove that was not the house mark, could not leave the county without his written leave. She had never once said this to the Duke of Sandford. She could see with perfect clarity how it would go if she did. A duke would simply buy the indenture out, and it would be done in an afternoon, and every soul in 3 counties would know that the glover's girl who had been given the hall's contract was the glover's girl the Duke had paid for. What Rebecca wanted was to win the contract on her book. She found the rest of it on the 22nd, and she found it because of Ellen Poole's wages. Ellen was 15 and sent 9 shillings a month home to her mother in Bury, and on the 22nd she came to Rebecca in the yard, white-faced, with a folded paper, because her mother had written to say that only 6 shillings had come in September and only 6 in August. Rebecca went to the office at 7 that evening when Wilkins was at his supper, and she did not break in because she had a key, because for 11 years she had been the one who opened the workroom at 6 in the morning. The wage book on the desk showed Ellen Poole 9 shillings every month, initialed. The wage book in the second drawer, in the same hand, showed Ellen Poole 6. There were 2 books for everything. 2 books, kept side by side for years, one for the eye and one for the truth. Rebecca sat down in Isaac Wilkins's chair and went through them both by candle for 2 hours with the cold coming up through the floor, and she copied nothing and moved nothing and took nothing, because she had a better idea than taking. Underneath the second wage book was a japanned tin box, and in the box were the indentures, 22 of them, going back 19 years. Hers was 4th from the top. She had never actually read it. She had signed it at 14, in a room with her father 9 weeks dead, and her mother crying in the passage. And she had signed it again at 19, with a hand covering the top half. And she had never once read the thing entire. The articles of Rebecca Wright, Glover's daughter, of the parish of Weldon, bound to Isaac Wilkins for the term of 7 years, consented and signed by her father and lawful guardian, Thomas Wright Glover, of the same parish. Dated the 3rd of May. Her father had died on the 11th of April. She sat in the office a long time with the paper in both hands and the candle going down. There was no fury in her at all, which surprised her. There was something colder and much more useful. 22 apprentices, 19 years, a dead man's signature on the paper that had made her hands his property, and a house mark stamped on 12 years of her cutting, and 2 letters written to a duke saying, "The wrist seam is our own particular finish. I taught it myself." She put everything back exactly as she had found it, in the order she had found it, and locked the office, and went home and told Susan. Susan cried. Then Susan told her the rest. "He has me say it," she said. at the counter, when they ask who cut them. He has me say I did, or that it's the house, and I say the house because I can't say I did. And they think I'm being modest, Becca. They think I'm being modest, and they buy another pair." She had both hands over her mouth. "He told me it was for the shop. He told me you didn't want it, that you'd hate being looked at. And I believed him because you would hate it, and I let him. For 4 years I let him." "You did," said Rebecca. "I'm not going to say anything that makes it smaller." "No, don't." Susan lowered her hands. "Tell me what to do on the 29th, Rebecca told her. The tenders were read in the great hall at Sandford at 11 in the morning on the 29th of September, at a long oak table with the light coming down from the high windows, and it was not a private meeting, because the Duke of Sandford had let it be known that any tradesman of the town who wished to attend might attend. 19 of them came. Mr. Naylor sat at the Duke's right with the contract in front of him. The Norwich House sent 2 men in good coats. Isaac Wilkins came in his snuff-brown coat and his fine, pale kid gloves, with Susan on one side of him in white muslin, and Rebecca on the other in dark red silk, which was the first silk gown she had ever owned, and which she had made herself out of a bolt bought with 14 months of saved wages. Wilkins spoke for 11 minutes. He spoke well. He spoke about 30 years of his own hand on the knife, and about the house method, and about the trust of 3 counties, and he laid a bound sample book on the table with the gilt letters on the cover, and he said twice that everything that left his door left it under his own mark. "Thank you," said the Duke. "Miss Wright?" Rebecca stood. She had brought 2 things. The first was the measurement book, and she laid it open at entry 1104 and turned it so that Naylor could read it. And then she laid beside it the 46 entries she had taken from the household in August, and then the christening order of January the year before last, and then a dozen more, and she said nothing at all about any of it, because 1104 hands in one upright hand does not require a speech. The second was a plain deal box. She set it on the table, opened it, and took out 1 glove and laid it in the middle of the oak, folded flat, palm down, seam under. "There is a mark inside the wrist seam of that glove," she said. "I would like to ask Mr. Wilkins to describe it before anyone turns it over." The room went quiet in the particular way rooms do. Isaac Wilkins looked at the glove on the table, and then at 19 tradesmen of the town, and then at a duke who was waiting with his hands folded, and he made the only mistake left to him, which was to be quicker than the silence. 3 stitches, he said, at the wrist of the left, set slanting. It is my own finish, sir, and I have set it there myself these 30 years. Nobody moved. Rebecca reached out and turned the glove over. It was a right-hand glove. There were 4 stitches in it, upright, in a line. 3 at the thumb gusset, slanting, was my father's mark, she said. Thomas Wright. He died on the 11th of April, 11 years ago. Mr. Wilkins bought this business in the October following, and has used my father's mark on the sample book ever since, which is his right, since he bought it. She put her hand flat on the deal box. 4 upright at the wrist is mine. It is not the house finish. It has never been the house finish. It is on every pair I have cut in this town for 12 years, and it is inside the glove His Grace has been carrying since January of last year, and Mr. Wilkins has answered 2 letters from this house saying that mark is his. She did not raise her voice once. Mrs. Lacey said afterwards that it was the levelness that did it, that a shout would have let him call it a girl's temper, and that Becca Wright read out a dead man's date the way you would read a bill of lading. The Duke of Sandford spoke for the first time. Mr. Naylor, Read the date on the articles of Rebecca Wright." Naylor unfolded a paper he had been holding since 10 o'clock that morning, obtained that week from the magistrate's clerk in the ordinary way, because indentures are registered, and anybody who knows to ask may ask. "The 3rd of May, he said. "And the date in the parish register," said the Duke, "for the burial of Thomas Wright, glover, of this parish. The 14th of April. He died on the 11th. There is a moment in the collapse of a certain kind of man, when the charm goes out of the face, and there is nothing underneath it, no rage and no cunning, only the surprise of a person who has always been able to talk his way along, and has just discovered the end of the road." Isaac Wilkins stood in the great hall at Sandford, with his fine, pale kid gloves in his hand, and looked around a table of 19 men he had sold to for 20 years, and found that not one of them was looking back. Susan Wright stepped forward at the far end of the table. "There are 2 wage books in the office," she said clearly. "One for the eye and one for the truth. Ellen Poole is 15, and has been paid 6, and entered at 9 since April. I have been telling customers at that counter for 4 years that my sister's work was the house's. That was a lie, and I told it. I'm telling this instead. It took the magistrate 6 weeks. The indenture of Rebecca Wright was void, having been executed with the signature of a man 3 weeks buried, and so were 9 others, and the remaining 12 stood but were assigned elsewhere by the bench. Isaac Wilkins was not transported, and was not hanged, because forgery of an indenture and false entry of wages are not those kinds of crime, and Rebecca had not wanted those kinds of ending. He was struck from the register of the town's masters, forbidden to hold apprentices, ordered to make good 19 years of underpaid wages down to the last shilling, and sold the green-fronted shop in the High Street in February to meet it. He went to a nephew in Ipswich. The gilt letters came off the window with a hot knife, and left a shadow of themselves in the paint for a year, which Rebecca rather liked, and left there. The Sandford contract was awarded on the 29th of September to Rebecca Wright, 412 pairs a year, signed by her own hand as a free woman 4 days after the magistrate's finding, with Mr. Naylor witnessing and looking, for the first time in 19 years of stewardship, faintly pleased. She took the lease on the green-fronted shop with the contract as security, at 5% from a bank in Bury, and not 1 shilling of it came from Sandford Hall. She had been very clear about that, and the Duke of Sandford, who understood exactly why, had not argued for more than 1 evening. Mrs. Lacey came with her and took the first bench. Ellen Poole came with her and took the 3rd, on articles of 5 years, read aloud twice in front of her mother before anyone signed anything. Susan stood at the counter, and when customers asked who cut them, she said, "My sister, Rebecca Wright. She's in the back, and she'll fit you herself if you can wait 10 minutes." They could always wait 10 minutes. He asked her in April, in the cutting room, at the end of an ordinary Tuesday, with his hat on the corner of the 2nd bench where he always put it. He did it plainly, because he was a plain man when it came to it, and because she would have distrusted anything else. He said that he had spent 14 months looking for a pair of hands, and had found a person, and that he had waited until she had her own name over her own door, and her own contract in her own hand, so that nobody in Suffolk, including her, could ever say which came first. He said he was 33, and had been alone in a very large house for 2 years, and had not once been bored in that room. He said the words she thought he would find hardest last, and said them straight, that he loved her, and had for some while, and would like her to marry him. Rebecca Wright, who had spent 12 years not being looked at, found that being looked at directly by this particular man was survivable. She said yes. Then she said that she would keep cutting, and he said he had assumed so, and she said she meant properly, 4 days a week, at the bench, with the shop in the high street staying open under her name. And he said he had assumed that too, and had already worked out that the carriage could bring her in at 8. "You'd thought about the carriage," she said. "I have thought about very little else since January of last year." He asked then if he might see her wrist. She untied the black ribbon and put it on the bench and turned her arm over under the north light, and the small dark mark sat where it had always sat, an inch above the bone. He looked at it for a long moment. "I saw that before I saw your face," he said. "I have been looking for it in every room I have walked into for 14 months. At the assembly I nearly dropped your sister's hand. Susan would have died. Susan," said the Duke of Sandford, "has since told me that she stood at a counter for 4 years saying the wrong thing in front of 19 men without being asked to. Your sister will do very well." Rebecca did not tie the ribbon back on. She put it in the drawer under the third bench and left it there. They were married in Weldon Church in June, and the shop closed for 1 day, and Mrs. Lacey wept steadily from the beginning of the service to the end, and denied it afterwards to everyone. 2 years on a bright, cold morning in January, the Duchess of Sandford was at the third bench in the cutting room in the High Street, with her sleeve pushed back to the elbow, cutting a christening pair, while Ellen Poole, 17 now and out of her 2nd year, ran her palm twice across a hide at the bench opposite and turned it around to find the stretch. "Across there," Ellen said. "It gives that way." "It does." "So you cut?" "With it. Never across it." "Never across it," Rebecca agreed. The bell went over the door, and Susan's voice came down the passage, saying that Mrs. Naylor had come about the wedding gloves for her daughter, and could wait 10 minutes, and the stove ticked, and the north light came in flat and honest over the benches, the only light in Suffolk that does not lie. Rebecca finished the christening pair at 11:30. She turned each glove and set 4 small upright stitches at the wrist seam, and then she took them to the small brass press at the end of the bench, and stamped the outside of each cuff in plain letters 1/8 of an inch high, where any hand wearing them would show it to any room they walked into. Wright, Weldon. Her left sleeve was still pushed back. The mark sat 1 inch above the bone, uncovered, in full view of the window, and she did not think about it at all.